Welcome to the second session of our event. And I would like to introduce, we have invited 4 persons, expert speakers to give us brief perspectives. The purpose of the session is to bring all the territorial agenda closer to the Interreg programs. And we've invited Sina Redlich from the Federal Institute for Research on Building, Urban Affairs and Spatial Development from Germany. Then we have invited Olivier Baudelet from DG Regio, Unit D2 on cross-border cooperation. Then we have invited Frederic Christoph Richters from the Ministry of Energy and Spatial Planning in Luxembourg. He's also, let's say, leading another pilot action. And finally, we have invited Nicolas Rossignol from ESPON. And the first part, we will hear Sina talking a bit about, there's a title, Expectations from the Territorial Agenda 2030 towards Interreg. And Sina has, let's say, during German presidency, has been working closely on the territorial agenda. Some of you may know Sina from her cautious but still persistent attempts to harmonize indicators across transnational programs. And we like you for that, Sina, and to bring a bit more territorial awareness in all these indicator systems of the programs. But now I think you're on home ground, Sina, really in spatial planning. And I would like to give the floor to you to tell us a bit more.
Thanks, Bernhard. Yes, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. In fact, this event really kind of combines both of my main working tasks in relation to the territorial agenda, where we have been involved in the update and the rework of the agenda during the presidency, and where we're also carrying out a pilot action on behalf of the Ministry of the Interior in Germany. It's about lagging regions, but this is not what I'm talking about today. Today I'm talking about Interreg. My colleagues and I, we are members of the monitoring committees and programming committees of the 6 transnational programs that Germany is involved. So we are ourselves in the middle of the programming, and yes, today I have the task here to talk about the expectations from the TA towards Interreg. And yeah, I'll be talking about that in the next few minutes. Next slide, please. So what are the expectations? I think we've heard already by Jan and by Lisa that Interreg can make an important contribution towards the implementation of the territorial agenda. And this is because Interreg is a territorial program, and it promotes place-based approaches. Especially the territorial perspective has been in the focus of programming these years. And there are many projects and priorities looking at a just and a green Europe. And also, therefore, the TA is an important reference document for Interreg. And in practice, Interreg programs can translate the priorities of the territorial agenda. They are quite abstract, of course, just reading them, but many projects are making a contribution already, and they contribute to translating this kind of abstract concepts and strategies to the regional and to the local levels. Next slide, please. So before going into this more in practice, the first, probably most easy thing to do for an Interreg program is to make a reference to the territorial agenda. This can be included in the IP template if this is what the member states and all the actors involved in the Interreg program agree upon. I have seen a couple of examples about this already. Of course, it would be a general reference to activities or strategies like the Green Deal, like the Leipzig Charta, but also about the territorial agenda, a future for all places. This fits very well, I think, in line with what Interreg programs are already doing and programming. Often programs are having the objective to use the potential of their regions and to make them more attractive, to make them more livable and resilient through cooperation, and thereby to help them to achieve a transition towards a greener society, towards a more balanced development. Often the focus of Interreg programs is on the development of cities and of regions, and therefore it comes quite natural to make this reference visible then in the strategic document. Next slide, please. Now I'm going more into the two key objectives of the territorial agenda and trying to link this to Interreg programs. The first one, of course, being a green Europe, which is obviously represented in both strategic guidelines. So in the territorial agenda, this is the main one of the main priorities, one of the two, and of course within the ERDF political objectives, this is PO2, pretty much with the same title, A Greener Europe. So the linkage is very obvious here. By programming these SOs and by including a place-based approach, Interreg projects will contribute to implementing the TA. And I've listed a couple of examples. For example, in SO 2.1, projects where Interreg programs could program types of activities or include this SO in order to strengthen capacities for climate neutral energy planning at local level or at regional level, or to promote climate neutral cities and regions. Funding projects in this kind of SO and with this kind of perspective will then directly also have an impact on the implementation of the TA. And we can continue with a number of these examples, promoting renewable energy communities. This would link to SO 2.2. Implementing climate adaptation measures in cities and regions, SO 2.4. And circular economy approaches, which are also having quite an important role in the Interreg programs that I see in future. And this can make a very direct impact on local and regional level and can have a very place-based approach. So this is a good SO to make this direct link between the strategies. Promoting green and blue infrastructures in urban and rural settings will make this link in SO 2.7 and 2.8, promoting sustainable multimodal mobility. And then, of course, these kind of activities can be further explained and further detailed in your programs. But looking at communities and cities and regions to implement these green sector approaches will create this link. Next slide, please. And I've just picked out one project example to show that this is already happening, and this is can be translated quite easily into project context. This is the climate active neighborhoods projects in Northwest Europe, and they are doing energy retrofits of existing residential areas, and thereby achieving CO2 reduction. And they have been working on increasing the capacity of municipalities so that they can implement their climate action strategies more efficiently, and they are using a neighborhood approach for this. Residents of these areas will be empowered and involved, and they act for climate change locally, and the effect is energy improved households and reduction of energy poverty. So this is a practical example where we have a green topic, where we have a place-based approach, and where we have a Interreg program combining both these elements. And it has, by the way, also won a Regio Star Awards last year, I think. Next slide, please. Then for the second TA priority, Just Europe, the link is not quite as direct as with PO2 to the green priority, but there are a number of ERDF policy objectives that are actually having a contribution or can make a contribution to a Just Europe. The most obvious one would be policy objective 5, bringing Europe closer to the citizens, but also ISO 1, better corporation governance, as well as policy objective 1, smarter Europe, can be programmed in a way that it will make a contribution to the territorial agenda priorities and the idea behind the territorial agenda. The idea, as we've learned, is not only to look at the economic side of things or the environmental side of things, but to look at this integrated approach, looking at the development of territories. And yeah, simple as that, programming these SOs within these policy objectives and including a place-based approach, Interreg projects will contribute to implementing the TAU. And I have listed a couple of examples here. For example, within PO1, enabling regions to apply existing innovative approaches could be a way to link the innovation world with the place-based regional development world. Then ensuring services and employment opportunities for young people, families, and well-qualified people in structurally weak and rural areas. By linking the activities to certain needs of certain territories, it will make it easier for those kind of actors and authorities also to be involved in projects. And we have learned that the rural areas have particular development needs, and people are moving away from there, and some places are not offering enough services, and it's just not attractive for families or well qualified people to live there. And Interreg can have very hands-on approaches in this context and promote these kind of opportunities. Then one further element could be promoting resilient and diversified economic structures, advancing the digitalization of public services and services of general interest, integrating target groups. This can be linked to social innovation, but these kind of aspects that put vulnerable groups into focus can also be linked to PO4, for example, having a more target group focused approach. And again, this keyword of improving capacities is a way to include, can be a focus, or can be a way to look at the regional development and improving the capacities of organizations, and thereby enhancing the regional development, and giving, for example, public authorities the capacities to manage societal challenges, including demographic change. This links very much to the territorial agenda objectives. And I have one example on the next slide. This is the SEMPRE project in the Baltic Sea region. And it is a project in the field of social innovation. So today it would be under PO1 probably. And they are tackling societal challenges such as demographic changes. They are promoting the involvement of disadvantaged groups, for example, single parents, migrants, in service provision and service innovation. And they have created local empowerment networks in the partner regions in the Baltic Sea to organize co-creation processes. And therewith they have created 30 locally based user-led micro projects, empowering the population and the people in those areas, and thereby also to make it more attractive to live there and to see a future there, and thereby not leaving these places behind, but to make them livable. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned a couple of ERDF prior policy objectives that can have a quite good link, but in principle, all policy objectives can be programmed in a way that they have a place-based approach. This is to focus on topics which are of importance for cities and regions. Also important to have the right actors involved in those projects. So not only having science and the economy involved, but to involve local and regional players, actors, civil society, NGOs, and of course also academia and SMEs, for example. But by having these kind of integrated partnerships, the integrated way of looking at things and to develop regions will be more easily incorporated into projects. Place-based would also relate to making projects closer to citizens, so fund projects where there is relevance for inhabitants that are maybe visible for inhabitants. And yeah, the integrated approach is always a difficult buzzword, but basically it means to involve different sectors and angles in project activities, not only looking at the economic or the environmental side, but to look at the entire region and to involve different angles of views. And then it will be very easy, of course, or very useful to link project activities to the implementation of regional strategies. And regional strategies will then are the regional level of the territorial agenda. Yes, next slide, please. Just to repeat what has already been said and what is the case, there are many Interreg projects already which contribute to the TA. They are maybe not labeled as such, but there's a big list. We have a publication on the Territorial Agenda website that lists a number of examples of Interreg projects and also other kind of national, regional projects that contribute to the priorities of the Territorial Agenda. And yeah, by labeling them as such, it will also be easier to create this link and to translate the priorities to the regional development. On my last slide, I have just indicated my contacts, and if you can please, yes, thanks. And the link to our website and the Territorial Agenda websites, where you can find further information on the Territorial Agenda, on the implementation actions, as well as on the pilot actions, also future for lagging regions. Thank you.
Thanks, Simna. Wow. So I think you've managed to bring us already very close to the Interreg programs. Thanks a lot, because initially my dream was that by the end of this event, we would have a couple of criteria which help people in the programs to see what is a good project in a territorial sense. What is a project prone to support territorial agenda? And I think your introduction to the topic already provides a lot of these criteria. And with that, I would like to ask Olivier if you maybe comment a bit on, because I think Sina really brought us already very close to the Interreg programs and to parts of the roles the programs could play for the implementation of the territorial agenda. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Bernhard, and good morning to everybody. Indeed, Zina said a lot, so I will try to complement a bit more from a program point of view than from a project point of view, because indeed from a project point of view, everything she said is very relevant. The first thing which is really important to underline is that, as we saw, the territorial agenda is really very ambitious, and it also addresses many of the issues of the future. So it has to happen. That's clear. It has to happen. It should not only stay words on policy or political documents, but it has to flow in the policies which can really make the change happen on the ground for the citizens. And we all believe today that Interreg is one of these policies. So what I'll try to do is to cover 3 points. The first one is, what does the territorial agenda bring to Interreg? The second is, how does the Interreg programs contribute to the territorial agenda? And the third point will be what can be done concretely, and again, more from a program point of view, because from a project point of view, Zina covered it very well. So the first point, what does the territorial agenda bring for Interreg? What is important is that the territorial agenda explicitly confirms that cross-border cooperation is important for the EU, is important for territorial development. And hence, we in the Interreg community, we can use the territorial agenda as a way to gather support from the member states. Because the territorial agenda is an intergovernmental initiative. It has been supported at a very high political level by the member states. And this is something we can use to remind the member states of their commitment. For example, in terms of governance, in terms of cross-border governance, for example, in terms of embedding cooperation into the ERDF programs. Many member states basically don't want to do it, but if they don't want to do it, there is a contradiction with what they sign in the territorial agenda. So we can use the territorial agenda to make it happen, and also maybe to have funding for more strategic projects like infrastructures, railroads, common wastewater treatment plants, common hospitals, and things like that. So that's the first message. The territorial agenda can be used to remind member states of the importance of cross-border cooperation. The second point I want to make is to explain a bit how do the Interreg programs actually contribute to the territorial agenda. Zina said it already, most of the things we already do in the programs indeed contribute to the territorial agenda. The main goals are indeed embedded in the Interreg programs for many years now, and we will of course ensure that in the future it continues. For example, this idea of having an integrated approach, well, we do it and we will do it. Programs should have a strategy. The strategy should be based on the needs, it should be based on the potentials, and it should be addressed through actions which are multi-sectoral, so integrated. So we do that. The second goal of the territorial agenda, this idea of having a participative approach, again, this is something that we have done in the past, that we want to strengthen even more in the future, having an involvement of the local authorities, of the stakeholders, of the civil society and the citizens in general, of the young people in particular. So that is important also for the Interreg programs. The third principle or goal of the territorial agenda, which is the multi-level governance, is also something we do in Interreg programs, because to make cross-border cooperation or transnational cooperation happen, you need to involve all those who have something to do in it. And that's the national level, the regional level, but also the local level. And in the cross-border cooperation programs, we are quite unique because we work with the NUTS-3, so really the local level. And to have a policy with the NUTS-3, to make it happen really on the ground, you need indeed to involve the other levels. And that's why we are used to work in a multi-level way. Then there is the goal of having a place-based approach. Of course, it's the case for many programs, the ERDF programs, but even more in the Interreg programs, which should be based on functional areas. So this idea that what you do depends very much on where you do it, it's something we do in Interreg. And finally, the fifth goal is to have a policy for the common good. And this is what we are really trying to do. Programs should have an impact in the daily lives of the citizens. And that's why in the negotiations, we try to have probably less funds allocated for research and more funds allocated to people-to-people actions, to cross-border commuters, you know, who work on a daily basis on the other side of the border, on health matters, really things which touch the daily life of the citizens. So that was my second point, to show that the Interreg programs, the way they are built, contribute already and will continue to do so to the territorial agenda. And now my third point about what can be done concretely, what can the programs do concretely. Again, on the project side, please refer to the previous presentation. I will focus more on the program side. First point I want to say is, don't worry, there isn't an additional legal requirement. It's not something which will be in a checklist for us to check, you know, in the adoption process. So it's not an additional requirement. But of course, Interreg needs to be in line with the general policy frameworks, but also and particularly in line with the territorial agenda. And hence, the Interreg programs should deliver on the goals of the territorial agenda. And here it's quite good that the timing fits perfectly. The territorial agenda was now adopted and the programs are starting the negotiations. And this was not always the case in the past. It wasn't the case for the urban agenda for the EU. It was not always the case for the macro-regional strategies where there was not the same timeline. And here we are quite lucky. It's a perfect timeline. Territorial agenda adopted, the negotiations are starting. So we can really make something happen. Then, as I said, it's already implicitly the case that Interreg programs deliver the territorial agenda. Implicitly, it's already the case. However, it would be nice if it could be made explicit, for example, with a reference to the territorial agenda. And even more, and in particular for those programs in regions which are concerned by the pilots, there should really be something. For example, there is a pilot on alpine towns. Well, the programs in the alpine region should really say something about it. The same goes for the lagging regions, for the small places, for those who are interested in spatial planning, where there is also a pilot. So for all these, there should really be a mention of the territorial agenda. And also for those, of course, who will use the policy objective 5, because the policy objective 5 is clearly something which is based on a functional area and hence based on a territory. So that's a bit the 3 points I wanted to cover. And later, I understand there will be a question and answer session. And of course, I would be happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Olivier. That has brought again a number of very important points, how this can be anchored at program level from integrated actions. What I like particularly is also to reflect that cross-border infrastructure could be one of the levers for a more efficient use, very practical, saving energy, saving space. So very, yeah, impressed and a lot of important points to take home. Now our third speaker, coming to Frederick. Frederick comes from a very small country, Luxembourg, where I would say cross-border cooperation is vital in any sense. But maybe before you start, Frederick, what I like very much, territorial cohesion is a very abstract word. It's a term, I learned it still at university, that it's the harmonious, balanced development of parts of any given country, which is for me a totally abstract concept. And I liked very much the alternative definition you gave to us when we had our prep talk. Frederick, maybe at the start you could briefly explain to us the definition you see for territorial cohesion.
Okay, so I get the complicated questions right at the beginning. I think for me, territorial cohesion could be summed up as leaving no territory behind. I think it's the application of sort of an equality of opportunity to the territorial level. It shouldn't matter where you live or where you work. This should not sort of give you any disadvantage in terms of accessing, be it services, being able to go to school, be it able to have access to healthcare, have public transport. So for me, that is sort of the basic definition of what territorial cohesion is. It means that all parts of the territory are equally important and should have sort of the same. I mean, they should probably not be at this. There's no requirement that they should be at the same development level, because I also think it's very hard to fully implement that. But where they are located on the territory should not give them an inherent disadvantage. And the government should take positive action in order to remediate that. I hope that satisfies your...
It satisfies my curiosity, and I think it's a very good approach to it. Thanks a lot.
But I will come also back to that later. I actually have that on a slide. So if I could get the first slide. So I will present to you today the pilot action vision for a zero carbon cross-border functional region. And to very briefly explain the context, this pilot action is based on a process here in Luxembourg that is called Luxembourg in Transition. It was launched last year in October. And I have put here a definition on the slide. It's what we call a cooperative competition, where we have invited a number of international multidisciplinary teams. So this means they can come from, be research institutes, be university, but also be consultancies that specialize in different topics related to the transition process. And we asked them to develop territorial visions and implementation strategies for this transition process of the cross-border functional region of Luxembourg until 2050. Why is it a cooperative competition? Because there are different stages to this process. So at the beginning, 10 teams have presented their reports. They will then be evaluated by different kinds of institutions or bodies of this process. And so in the next stage, there will be 6 teams. And at the end, we will have 3 different sort of competing visions and implementation strategies, where we hope to find an inspiration for our national policy documents and plans. It was very important for us to not only look at Luxembourg as a closed off entity and as a country, because as you said, as a small country, in the heart of Europe, not the least, cross-border cooperation is vital for us. We have more than 200,000 people coming into Luxembourg every day. That is 1/3 of the entire population, basically, that is coming to Luxembourg every day and leaving in the evening. So therefore, it was very important for us to also look at the cross-border functional area. The key questions that in this process we are looking at is how to develop a joint territorial vision for this area, and how to translate it into concrete projects that cover both sides of the border. So for us, it doesn't make sense if you talk about reducing carbon emissions. It doesn't make sense to say we're only focusing on measures in Luxembourg if on the other side of the border the status quo is going on, I think then we have achieved nothing. Therefore, it's really important to look at both sides of the border. And we thought it's very important to look at this cross-border dimension of decarbonization and resilience. I mean, we have a European approach to it, but we think that especially in cross-border regions, it's maybe a topic that has not been covered so extensively, and so therefore we really want to tackle this. And this also gives us this double focus of, on the one hand, cross-border, and on the other hand, transition, meaning decarbonization and resilience. The goals that we have with this concrete pilot actions is that we sort of want to take this Luxembourg and transition process as a good practice and share the methodology with European partners and try to inspire its transfer. The transfer can be basically small elements of it, but it can also be the entire process. So we are very open about that. But we think that it's an important topic to cover, and that many cross-border regions in Europe could benefit potentially from this experience. But we also want to make this a little bit wider and discuss the challenges of cross-border spatial planning in relation with the ecological transition, so that we sort of create a little bit of a legacy, so that it's not alone a standalone process, but that sort of as the implementation of the territorial agenda goes on, there is something that remains, and that in the future partners that are interested can have a look at what we were doing. But I should mention that we are very flexible, and we are going to adjust the pilot action to the expectations and also interests of the partners specifically. The next slide, please. Here's just a very short visualization. What do I mean when I talk about the cross-border functional region of Luxembourg? So in the dark purple, you basically see Luxembourg. Around that is what we would define as the cross-border functional region. It's basically linked to commuting. So where do most of the commuters come from? And sort of the light gray shape, that is really the institutional setting of the greater region. So this is at a much larger scale, and we are really more interested in what is really sort of directly surrounding the country. And on the right side, you see some of the topics. I took this from a presentation on one of the teams. Some of the topics that we were looking at: so waste, mobility, food, drinking water, which surprisingly is a huge problem for Luxembourg. And obviously energy consumption. The next slide, please. We have divided the pilot action into two different phases. One phase will start this month and will run for approximately 1 year. We have called it the initiation of a mutual learning and sharing process. What we are going to do is we will present and discuss the process step by step with the partners. And really also give them an opportunity to critically assess this and tell them from their perspective sort of what they think is worth transferring, what they think is working, what they think is not working, and maybe also have a reflection about what would this mean for a different sort of border context. I mean, all of this is really tailored to the Luxembourgish borders, but it could be a very different experience in borders in other parts of Europe. So we are really interested in also in hearing what the partners have to say about the process, and also the outputs that are coming from the teams. Sort of once we have concluded this mutual learning and sharing process, we would go to the second phase, where we want to develop a guidance note. So this is related to the sort of legacy that I was talking about. This will then take up the rest of the year 2022. Where based on the experiences, we want, together with partners, draft a short guidance note. So we are talking about 2 to 3 pages, where we would describe the different steps and try to distill some lessons learned on how to approach this topic in general. And we hope that also in the future, this will be interesting and useful for cross-border regions willing to engage in such a process. These are the 2 phases of the pilot action. If I could get the next slide. Here you just get a quick overview over the partners that so far. So as you can see, so here they are in chronological order. That was maybe not the best idea, I just realized. But as you can see, they really go from the European level down to the very local cross-border level, we have the Kommunalgemeinschaft Europa-Region Pomerania on the Polish-German border, which is really sort of at the local level. But we also have something in between with Český and MOT, two organizations that work respectively on the Hungarian borders, on the French borders. We have two EGTCs on the French, Spanish, and on the German, Dutch, Belgium border. We have the Association of European Border Regions, and also very importantly, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, to focus more on the climate and resilience. There are two more partners where they have indicated their interest, but where they have to check internally whether it's okay. So the Benelux Union and the European Committee of the Regions. And we really think that even with these two, that will make our partnership stronger. As I've said before, we are quite flexible. So we are not doing this sort of as a vanity project for ourselves, but we want to create something that is useful for the partners. So the involvement that they can give can really range from an active partner willing to transfer the process to more of a passive observer who's interested in some of the lessons learned. So we are really we're really flexible with that. And now, if we go to the next slide, please. I think I have 3 slides more specifically on what this means for Interreg. First of all, focusing on what this specific pilot action could be linked to Interreg programs in general. So in the short term, I can obviously ask, I mean, we have here programs from all over Europe. Do you know any actors who you think might be interested in participating in this pilot actions, partners who could benefit from the experiences? That would be sort of my open call for interest to all of you. In the medium term, I think the relevant questions, as the speakers before me have said, is could this pilot action, either smaller elements or the entire methodology, inspire the development of individual Interreg projects? A colleague of mine at the ministry has then pointed out to me that there could be a very strong link with PO5. So this is something that has to be explored, because obviously we are looking here at visioning. So that would be probably an action that would be predestined for something along the lines of PO5. But in any case, I thought it important to mention that we will inform and communicate about this pilot action in a very regular and transparent manner. At the moment, we are looking at, so we have a website for Luxembourg in transition, and we are looking at how we can make a specific section that deals with the European outreach and transfer. So this is more this pilot action and Interreg in general. If we could go to the next slide, please. I mention here a specific example. So there is a project called SDTGR, which is the French abbreviation for Spatial Development Concept for the Greater Region, which obviously is a project in the program of the cross-border program of the Greater Region, running from 2018 until the end of this year, which makes it slightly, let's say, odd, because obviously the pilot action is in the timing sort of behind this project. But I still think that this project is quite interesting, as it can offer an example of how this could be implemented. So what this project is doing, it is performing a territorial analysis of the Greater Region based on a joint set of indicators that were developed in a very cooperative process. Then they are developing a vision and an operational strategy in a participatory process. So there was a workshop where this was a large-scale workshop, I should add, where the vision and the strategy were developed. And at the end of it, a number of lighthouse projects will be launched. So I think these 3 elements are exactly what our process are doing, maybe less focused on decarbonization and resilience, but sort of more in a classical spatial planning perspective, integrated, covering several covering several themes, also economic development, etc. But if you are interested in looking more concretely what an Interreg project could look like, I really can recommend this project to you to give you a rough idea of what could be done to implement our kind of pilot action concretely via an Interreg project. And that would bring me to my last slide. Thank you. So which type of Interreg projects could contribute to the implementation of the TA2030 more broadly? As you can see on the picture, it is about the key question of how Interreg projects can be plugged into the TA. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I think at a very basic level, sort of projects that contribute and that aim at strengthening territorial cohesion across borders are a prime candidate for linking up with the territorial agenda. So here it is, while territorial cohesion is about leaving no one behind, I think the other side of the metal is creating something together. And so if a project is really strengthening the standing of a cross-border region sort of in both countries, making it more visible to the national authorities and making sure that it has an adequate provision of services, I think projects that do exactly that would be prime candidates for really contributing to the territorial agenda. If we go in the analysis a little bit further, what does territorial cohesion mean? Territorial cohesion also means dealing with the territorial dimension of sector policies. So what we usually talk about is that unfortunately, sector policies are often spatially blind in the sense that they are very much focused on their sector like objectives, but they make no distinction on how this is implemented on the ground. So we are really looking at a place-based approach that takes the specificities of the cross-border region into account and really tries to adapt the sector policies to that cross-border region. I have summed that up as territory matters. So as soon as a project would also really aim at doing that, at tailoring a specific sector policy to a cross-border region, we also think that it would be a perfect fit for the TA. And lastly, it's important that projects sort of promote an integrated and multi-level approach, which is the horizontal and the vertical integration, in the sense that everything is connected. So if projects really aim at providing or contributing to the whole picture, that different sectors in this cross-border region work together, but that also different levels work together, I think that is also a really good contribution that can be made to the implementation of the Territorial Agenda 2030. I think it would be really ambitious to combine all three of these elements. I don't want to call them criteria, but rather elements. But I think that a territorial vision for a cross-border region with concrete projects could actually achieve in combining all three of those elements. So yeah, that would be my answer on the link between Interreg projects and the TA. Thank you very much. And on the last slide, I think you can find my contact details. So if you know of any stakeholder or actor interested, just get in touch with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. A lot of food for thought. That's really, and what we have to clarify is how we set up somehow context awareness for these pilot actions as part of the territorial agenda, because this is really an open invitation to everyone working in or around Interreg programs to join, to reflect on, to contribute to. And also these elements which make a good project, I think there we can also start to compile it and make it accessible in a very condensed manner to programs. This is very, very helpful. So a lot of information from Frederick coming from a very, very small country within Europe, where it becomes really clear that tackling challenges purely with national policies makes very limited sense, because I've looked into it. Surface area of Luxembourg is 2,600 square kilometers. So this is really very small and really in the heart of Europe. So thanks a lot. And the fourth contribution brings us to ESPON, a sister program, another sister program to Interact. And Philip and I, we simply would like to strengthen the ties between our programs And ESPON really offers a lot in terms of materials, evidence, raising territorial awareness, which is one of the key issues we've heard now a lot about during this event. So I would say over to you, Nicolas.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you, Interreg, to bring us all here today. At first, maybe I will not insist on very, very small country as if someone look at it in Luxembourg. I would just say small country. It's already enough. Well, a lot have been said, and indeed, I'm kind of concluding this presentation round. So what I would like to share with the participants today is the following. On the one hand, we all know that to implement and also to monitor the implementation of the territorial agenda, there is a need for gathering good practices, for benchmarking, and for collecting relevant territorial evidence. On the other end, the ESPON program, the current one and also the next one, is one of the means that can be activated to support member states and local and regional stakeholders for that purpose. But if we, ESPON, can support the Interreg community, we also have expectations towards the community that I would like to share with the audience today. So if you could go to the first slide, maybe. So at the start, and as for many of you, I guess, the future ESPON cooperation program is being currently prepared. And the novelty requested by member and partner states is to embed in the upcoming program the priorities of the territorial agenda. So you may know that the territorial, cross-sectoral and functional perspective is the cornerstone of ESPON's evidence and knowledge. This has been developed in order to support public stakeholders to find appropriate, coordinated policy responses across sectors and across governmental and territorial levels. And in the future, the ESPON program may focus on two key topics that gather most of the issues and challenges to cohesion and also to sustainable development of European territories. The first one being green transition to climate neutral economies. And the second one could be just living conditions for all places and people. So you see, if this becomes the focus of the new program, and it will probably be, then ESPON will be able to properly and directly support the implementation of pilot actions, and also, if we are requested to support the presidencies in their task of monitoring the implementation of the overall process of the Territorial Agenda 2030. And for that, we will keep on providing the same kind of territorial evidence that we are used to and which are summarized on your screen. And actually, it won't be that easy as stated in the title of my intervention, but at least we hope it can be useful. So you might know that we are intervening at the different stages of policy design and implementation, bringing territorial evidence via various kind of activities such as pan-European comparisons, but also more targeted and more on-demand studies addressing local and regional policy processes. And of course, data, maps, thematically focused policy papers, and so on. So I will not develop further here what we are doing, but I will try to explain how we suggested to make a concrete use of this evidence for the first pilot actions of the TA2030 that have been identified. So if you could go to the next one, please. So the following are just examples of the kind of services that ESPON can provide. I found it interesting to share them with you as they have been discussed with the coordinators of the first 6 pilot actions recently. And they are framing a kind of work plan and a method also for us over the next month. On the one hand, there are a series of short-term actions that we can put in place upon request until the end of this cooperation program, let's say basically until mid-22, in a context where we are all running out of resources, you know that. So we will be able, on the one hand, to gather existing ESPON territorial evidence to inform both the territorial challenges and also territorial trends targeted by some pilot actions. We will also be able to activate our networks to support the coordinators in broadening and strengthening their partnership when needed. And eventually, we should also be able to mobilize additional resources, even though maybe not a lot, in order to implement, for instance, quick territorial studies, case studies, to bring also additional data or maps if needed, and to organize specific events like peer exchanges or transnational seminars. That's for the short term. In the longer term, and there I'm thinking about the next program, which might start from the end of next year, we will of course be able to do much more and to mobilize more substantial resources. So to sum it up, and even though, as you can understand, of course, things are not decided yet, but there might be 2 main directions for our support. Firstly, bringing new tailor-made territorial evidence to support the design of new pilot actions. And then secondly, in order to accompany also the implementation of pilot actions in addressing specific policy questions, we will be offering to projects and to programs, as you are calling yourself, to national, local, and regional stakeholders, as we are more used to say, the possibility to join ESPN targeted analysis and on-demand case studies. For this, of course, it will make sense to have at this time a strong partnership ready to apply. If you can go to the next one, I will try to explain also maybe more generally what I would like to share with you today, which is basically the kind of cooperation approach that we are proposing in regards to the territorial agenda. And I'd like to say that, of course, we can do things for you. Still, we have also some expectations towards the Interreg community. So starting with what ESPN can do for you. On the one hand, as I previously mentioned, we see a natural link between our targeted analyses, which are basically territorially focused on-demand studies, and local regional needs. The objective there is to translate EU territorial evidence and to bring a European perspective into something that is tangible for local stakeholders. And ESPN can accompany the process of implementing some pilot actions in the future to this kind of process, which allow also to embed together quite broad stakeholders partnerships. And also, because of our quite long list of projects and experiences, we may also be able in many circumstances to provide hints about places facing similar challenges and to support also in either peer exchanges or maybe in bringing additional partners to some existing partnerships. It's the case in particular when some local or regional stakeholders have already been involved in ESPN projects and they have already tested and implemented some policy responses in their own context. And most of the time, they are really keen in sharing their experience with others. And if relevant, we could activate this network of policymakers. Another area of relevance is when pilot actions will raise the need of being accompanied and will seek advice on what would be important to better understand in order to answer their policy needs. Then we are working with a network of really good researchers, and we can connect them to pilot coordinators. If local needs are linked to existing ESPN research, in their past or ongoing research, then we could even envisage to some spin-offs of some of our research activities, for instance. And also, as you know, we work with maps, we work with visuals, and we shall be able to offer map-making facilities for implementing pilot actions and also to visualize their results. Finally, results of pilot actions can be scaled up to the EU level. And for that, we are constantly organizing outreach events, we are producing policy papers, and we shall be here also to accommodate results of pilot actions to accompanying policy processes. But then, in the opposite way, we have also some ideas for what pilot actions could usefully do for us. At first, we think that projects and programs can be used as testers. Partnerships of stakeholders could help validate ESPN results and the usefulness also of our services. We call it a kind of checklist approach. Based on your scanning of relevant ESPN evidence, we can help you go through what is making sense for you and then be maybe more able to produce tailor-made pack of evidence or policy recommendations fitting your context. And then we see also a possibility to join or to unite with ESPN for joint presentation, like during the European Week, during the ESPN Weeks, and so on. We, for instance, were thinking about that the conference for the future of Europe could be a nice milestone for all of us in that context. We also count on you to promote ESPN role and support when attending European events, of course, if you have had a nice experience with us. And eventually, what we call reality checks. Same way as we are now trying to anchor the messages and the ambition of both the pilot actions and ESPN in local context, because we all know that it's not easy always to understand what the TA is about and also what ESPN is about. So this is also the means to go hand in hand and to see how the local recipients react to both ESPN and the territorial agenda. And we think we have a shared interest into that. So to conclude and to be short, because time is running, maybe some reflection about something which can be considered also from both perspectives. I'm thinking about the monitoring framework of the implementation of the territorial agenda. As I said, if the presidencies, of course, request it, ESPN will be there to support. But we also assume that there could be a role in there for the Interreg community in terms of identifying good practices, benchmarking, for instance. So this is more an open question from our side at this stage, but we will be much interested in knowing whether the community is ready to contribute to this process and which form also it could take. So it's an open question for the discussion to come. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Nicolas.
There were different colleagues quoting different people. I mean, we had Baldwin, Hopkins. I would maybe like to quote Humphrey Bogart. who said at the last line of Casablanca, saying, "This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." So if we actually manage with this event to plant a seed for a beautiful friendship between the territorial agenda and the Interreg community, I think we would be more than happy. As Bernard said, there's a lot of work ahead of us. So this was definitely just the first step into that direction. What we are going to do now is, of course, we will provide you with the various material from this event, presentations, some recordings. Jan mentioned we're going to do some recordings with some interesting projects happening in the Swedish-Norwegian context. So this kind of information, material promotion. The other thing which Bernard mentioned is what we already considered as a follow-up step is to get back to you and ask you that, based on what you have heard today, which are the projects you have in mind, which are these perfect territorial projects, so that we would continue this collection of best practices, elements which define a really impactful territorial project, taking on board the question, or maybe we say suggestion from some of you, how much KEEP could reflect on this. This is something we would need to take up with our KEEP colleagues. So there are a bunch of issues to be done, which for me leaves just to say thank you very, very much to all our speakers, to Elisa, to Jan, to Zina, to Frederick, to Olivier, to Nicolas, but also to all the participants with asking questions and staying with us until the very end. So from my side, just thank you very much. And as said, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.